I'm here today with some wonderful colleagues. My name is Michael Sullivan, and I want to introduce Michael Hendricks and Ray Woolridge and Jim Wilder. Excited to be here today because we're talking about a book that Jim and Ray have written together. They're going to tell us about it. So, Ray, why don't you start and tell us the background of this book? You're kind of the general, right? You've got the general background in the military. Jim's the neuroscientist, neurotheologian, and you guys have worked together to put this book together.
About the time I joined the Life Model Works team, I discovered a phenomenon that I really didn't know much about, and it's called enemy mode. Now, I knew about enemy. I had been trained in enemy mode, but also in identifying the enemy through the military. As a cadet at West Point, throughout my career in the Army, we specialize in who's the enemy and what are their capabilities, what are their vulnerabilities, how can we attack them and maximize our advantages against them. And that's really good on the battlefield. And yet, when you live your life in enemy mode, that's not good. And looking back through my life, I realized that I'd lived in enemy mode for a large portion of it. Even as a Christian, how I'd been at work, whether as a pastor or in the Pentagon. And so it was quite a journey, and so our book is entitled Escaping Enemy Mode, How Our Brains Unite or Divide Us. And my focus in the book, my story arc is my journey, personally, but also with high-profile leaders that I've known throughout my life, and convincing them, is enemy mode a thing? How does it work in your life? What triggers you into enemy mode, and then how do you get out of it yourself and help your team get out of it? And it was a fascinating journey. And Jim was working on the brain science, though.
Yeah, it had been my observation that people come into an engagement, it's often in relationship to a race or a hot topic or vaccinations or something like that, a political situation, with already the anticipation that we're not going to be on the same side, or you just get this little hint from somebody, the color of their hat or some other kind of thing that says, we're not going to be in this together. And all of a sudden the brain switches, it stops listening. It's sort of a relational blindness, and you actually can see it in the brain. Some functions shut down. They're like, I'm not listening to you, I'm not paying attention. I'm preparing what I'm going to do to make you agree with me, to make you look bad, do something. I said, what is it that's switching in the brain? Because once that switch is made, you kind of know, you feel it right inside, like you're not listening to me, we're not together. It's happening in families. I could go to a holiday meal and I realize if I say this in front of Uncle so-and-so, this is going to real fast, or he's going to escalate. And sometimes it would be like we withdraw and we just become quiet and we're not connecting. It's like, you talk all you want, but I'm not listening over here. And then sometimes it's like, I'm going to blow up and I'm going to say something stupid and everybody's going to be wishing they hadn't been here for this encounter meal. And then sometimes it's sort of intelligent. It's like, all right, you're going to be thinking, how are you going to take me out? How are you going to argue with me? In fact, that's kind of how I was learned to do evangelism. Like you go and talk to somebody about Jesus, right? And then you listen to, they're going to go into enemy mode. They're going to don't give me that religious stuff. And then I am supposed to be intelligently figuring out how to take them out and argue them out. It was really, even my Christianity had gotten sort of enemy mode-ish. And I hated doing that. So when people say, well, you want to talk to people about Jesus? I don't want to have a fight, because it wasn't about being a good listener. It wasn't about, let me really understand your life and how could you become more alive than you are right now, which is the alternative, this relational mode in the brain. So I needed to figure out, how does that work? Because you got to switch from one to the other, and what are the mechanisms that the brain uses? And it, it wasn't in the literature. So I said, if you can figure out how to convince Christians to stay out of enemy mode, I'm going to try to figure out how the brain does it so that whatever we teach, we can teach in the way the brain learns.
It's beautiful.
And as we did our research, we saw enemy mode reactions in every realm of life. I know, Michael, you've seen it in church settings.
Yep. Yeah, there's a mild form of enemy mode in the church is when someone comes to me with a problem, and as they're telling me the problem, I'm thinking, well, how do I fix this problem for them? Because really when I'm doing that, it doesn't seem like enemy mode. I'm not like angry necessarily, but I've stopped being relational. It's kind of a simple form you're going to talk about of enemy mode. A more severe one is I was listening to a podcast on a church where I think it was the executive secretary of the church. She was out to dinner with some of the other leadership at the church, and she mentioned, I think our lead pastor really should hang out with some older, more mature men and women. That would be good for him. And somehow from that group, it got back to the lead pastor. And then the lead pastor went in what we would call intelligent enemy mode and plotted her demise. And within a week or two, I don't know the exact amount of time, she was fired. So unfortunately, a lot of pastors actually operate and do their ministry. Their kind of their ministry strategy is to stay in intelligent enemy mode and win, where pastors are winners.
And you guys in the book talk about 3 different kinds of enemy modes. Ray, can you tell us about that?
Well, there's 3 types. There's simple, there's stupid, and there's intelligent. Now, as I introduce the concept to people who weren't aware of it, everybody got stupid. Stupid is when you lose it, when your brain flips its lid and you do harm to people that you normally would care about. And your brain is on overdrive and is not synchronized, hemisphere to hemisphere. Simple was harder to convince people because a lot of people are so relationally blind they don't see it. They learn to live with the relational side of their brain either turned way down or off altogether. And there's complex neurological and psychological reasons for why that happened. And I didn't see it either. I discovered along the way that I'd lived most of my life in simple enemy mode. Now, intelligent enemy mode is the creepy one. And intelligent enemy mode is where your brain is running very well, it is synchronized, but without attachment. And so you're doing whatever it takes to win the engagement with the other person. Now, of course, the worst villains in history were in intelligent enemy mode. But it's not just villains, it's pastors and it's CEOs and it's tiger moms who are doing whatever to manipulate a situation to their advantage.
And then we talk about needing to get out of enemy mode, and you guys linked a lot of that to this thing about status, right?
We did.
Right. Tell us a little bit about what that means. Where does status fit into this process?
People who want to win the enemy mode war are almost always trying to improve their status. In fact, if you want to get somebody on the wrong side, put them down. That's lowering your status. I say, you stupid so-and-so. Whether I do that with my voice tone or with my body or by like rolling my eyes or whatever else. And then the idea is that, that's going to improve my status. Well, that's the crass way to do it, right? But there's other sophisticated ways to do it. And, you just explain how utterly foolish the plan of the other party is, and how unworthy they are to make decisions, and you get this idea that we're better. And within Christendom, we tend to choose leaders who are going to make us look better. So the more likely to rise to the top are status-seeking people. And it bothered you a whole lot because there's a lot of Christian leaders we've seen just a disgrace when they blew up, right?
Absolutely, and they would do whatever it took to win, even if it meant crushing the opposition, and they would define this person who's opposing them as their opposition. And they would always elevate their own status and put down that other person's status. The example Michael talked here is one small example. I could tell you one interview that didn't make the book was a corporate leader who was hired by a company in Arizona. Right away, he and the CEO of the company, and he was one of the CEO's right-hand men, were not going to get along. And that CEO maneuvered and manipulated, so this man had no voice in the company, and his office was a kitchen. And that guy just maneuvered him out of influence in that company, even though he could have brought, and the terrible thing is, the CEO did it out of fear. He lowered the man's status when actually the man could have helped that company a lot.
Yeah.
Intelligent enemy mode is very destructive, and that's one example.
The interesting thing to me about enemy mode is it's state-dependent learning. And that is, just like we learn, there are certain things we do when we're in the water, but we don't try to do them when we're walking on land. The brain learns to respond to certain things once enemy mode is started, and enemy mode starts really fast before we're even consciously aware. So what we have to learn is not to stay out of enemy mode, but to get out of enemy mode. It's sort of like learning to steer on ice. How do you get out of a skid? You know, how do you get out of a slide? What do you do when the car starts, turning on you? That's actually the crucial thing. It's, how do you steer your way back to how you're supposed to be? And so to do that, we have to be with other people that let us practice.
Yeah.
So it's important to be around people who go, oh, you're in enemy mode, let's help me get you out of that skid here. This is where we teach each other and learn, and that's what I think is important for the Christian community, that instead of just learning how to fight over dinner about what we think is right, we learn how to pull each other out of those moments. Go like, oh, this is when you need me. I
remember we were doing a training in our basement with Jim, and he said, okay, so everybody, there's probably 25 of us in the basement, and Jim goes, okay, for the next week, I want everyone to write down at the end of the night, every time you think during the day that you've got into enemy mode. Right, so we all, every time, like big or small or whatever. And so we all came back that next week and everybody said, it's like, this is just eye-opening how many times my brain goes into enemy mode during a typical day. And over things, so silly things that now I look back but then we start working on them and sharing with them and getting help. So this is like something we do together, right?
I mean, for example, when someone cuts me off in traffic, they didn't endanger me so much as they just lowered my status, like you didn't care about me, and so I'm really mad. You cut in front of me in the grocery line, and you think you only got two things, and I'm thinking, well, you got only two things, but I got status here, I was here first, and it's actually the status lowering that gets an awful lot of these reactions going. What do we do to pull ourselves back? And that's the thing that the book has finally got to, out of history and out of brain science, compatible with Christian form of life, but it's a solution actually we're offering the world.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And, Michael and I are so proud of you guys for writing this book together, and that's something we can offer to the culture at large. Maybe a good on-ramp to consider the faith, to consider our faith. So, way to go.
I had a fascinating story in the book, and actually we're going to talk more with General Becky Halstead, but she, at one point in her career, worked for a really toxic boss. And he was in intelligent enemy mode all the time. And she was getting ready to take 20,000 soldiers to combat in Iraq. And the treatment that he gave her and her team was deplorable. So what did she do? Well, and many of our people who are going to read the book, many people we know work in a toxic work environment. What do you do? And what she did is, one thing is she remembered her attachment to God. She had daily practices that reminded her how deeply loved and connected to God she was. She also had a team of informal advisors around her. They were people that she handpicked and gave permission to speak into her life. And so when she was carrying a burden from the toxic boss and didn't know what to do about it, she could be herself. She could let her hair down, as it were, with this group and be honest and receive counsel for them. And when she was in enemy mode, they helped her stay out of it. And there are many other examples of that. But having people around you who can call out the best in you and can also call you when you're in enemy mode is so powerful.
She's one of the first women in the military as an officer, right?
Well, she's the first graduate of West Point, female graduate of West Point, to be selected for general officer.
So we have some examples from that, because women were occasionally given lower status.
That's right.
And there's African Americans, there's Native Americans, there's all kinds of things that in culture automatically load you with the lower status. And how do you actually become a force that overcomes that is part of what we're looking at and giving illustrations for.
We're really excited about this book, and we want to encourage our audience to get a hold of this book. And before we close, Jim, where do you want to see this book go?
Well, because enemy mode affects us in so many kinds of ways, we'd like to see it on every police chief's desk. We'd like to see it on educators' desks, because a lot of people learn enemy mode in grade school. We'd like to see it in hospitals. We'd like to see it with veterans who have actually been exposed to all these enemy mode experiences. We'd like to see it on leadership desks. Wouldn't it be nice if working environments were overcoming enemy mode? So wherever enemy mode has gone, we would like to see people working to escape enemy mode.
Consider buying 3 copies, 1 for yourself and 2 to give away.